It's hard to believe that they were maps, but that's exactly what they were. Primitive maps made by nomadic people who needed some kind of way of knowing their position as they wandered in search of food, moving from place to place. In the past, Labrador Indians along the coast of Canada drew astonishingly accurate maps on just pieces of bark. Eskimos carved maps on bone or pieces of driftwood like this in order to show the capes or the bays along the coast of Greenland. The early natives on the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean made charts using a framework of bamboo in order to remind themselves how to navigate from one island to another. These simple devices were made from observations alone, without any basis of scientific measurement that we know of. Yet they were very effective in recording information. So too was the clay tablet, perhaps the earliest of all forms of mapping on the surface of the earth. You are looking at what is believed to be the oldest map in the world, dating back over 4,000 years. Notice the ruler alongside the clay tablet, showing its length at less than 8 inches. Scientists have studied the tablet carefully and have redrawn what's on it so that we can see what the map really looked like. Can you discover the hills on the east and west? What about a river? It flows between the hills, doesn't it? The map was discovered in some ruins in an ancient land called Mesopotamia. Today we know this area as the country of Iraq, located here in a region we call the Middle East. This was where the Babylonians lived a long time ago. As far as we know, the Babylonians were the first people to make maps based on mathematics. Many of those early people who studied science and astronomy were convinced that the earth was indeed round. In fact, 500 years before the birth of Christ, they made this simple tablet of clay, on which they scratched what perhaps is one of the first attempts at a world map. It shows the world as a disk, with Babylon at the center, ringed by the earthly ocean. At this same time in history, the Greeks began putting down their own ideas about what they believed the earth to be like. Notice that the country of Greece centers here in the eastern Mediterranean region, not far from Babylon and the country of Egypt. The Greek capital of Athens was an important center of power, of art and culture, and most importantly, of trade. This was their world, centering around Athens. This is what they believed the world to look like, compiled from the work of such early Greek historians and geographers as Herodotus and Strabo. Notice that only 3 continents were known at this time: Europe, Asia, and Africa. Their shapes, of course, not very accurate. Surrounding all land was the great unknown ocean, believed to extend outward in all directions. Perhaps the greatest of all the early map makers was this man, Ptolemy, Claudius Ptolemy. He drew the world more accurately than it had ever been drawn before, and this was only 150 years after the birth of Christ. He too was a Greek, although he lived in Alexandria, Egypt. And like other Greek geographers, he was convinced that the earth was round. His 27 maps of the world, which includes this one, make up the first atlas ever put together. There were 10 maps showing Europe, 12 of Asia, 4 of Africa, and this one, showing the entire known world at that time. This important work was called Geographia. Each map was drawn with north at the top of the map, projected onto Ptolemy's own spherical grid system of latitude and longitude, which he designed in order to show the round earth on a flat surface. His methods of map construction are followed in principle even today. In fact, it's rather amazing that his work, his Geographia, rediscovered some 1,300 years after his death, was published in many different languages, and used over and over again by the best geographers of the day. No wonder we call Ptolemy one of the greatest of all map makers. For a long time after his death, ideas of science, earth measurement, map making were almost completely forgotten. It was a period in history that became known as the Dark Ages. In fact, this fragment, which is a copy of the original, is all that remains of one of the oldest known Christian maps that we have. It was made in the 6th century A.D. Looking closely, you can distinguish several ships on a sea of water, which is really the Dead Sea, the day-forming part of the boundary between Israel and Jordan. Over here is depicted the city of Jerusalem. Maps of this period were often made by monks whose knowledge of the world was limited by the boundaries of their abbeys. They drew the world as they thought it should be, not as it was. Jerusalem was often the center of the map, and since it was east of the Mediterranean world, the top of the map was oriented to the direction of east, not north. This medieval map-making looked fancy enough, but it wasn't very useful. By the 1500s, a new age had awakened the world, the age of exploration, of discovery, of conquest. Men in small ships like this set sail to find new lands to the west, to gain fame and fortune, and to prove that the world was round. Even before this ship sailed west in 1492, a German by the name of Martin Behm had already constructed the world's first globe. Today in Nuremberg, Germany, you can actually see this large original globe, showing the Earth as he believed it to be. Notice that he colored the great ocean black and then filled it with writings of different colors to explain his world. He even named cities in Asia from the extraordinary tales of Marco Polo, whose travels most people only half believed. Of course, in less than a year's time, Behm's globe was out of date, because a man by the name of Christopher Columbus not only changed history, but changed all maps of the world as well. One of Columbus's navigators on his trip to the New World was a map maker of some skill. His name, Juan de la Cosa. Thanks to his carefully kept records and drawings, we have one of the earliest maps to show any part of the New World. I know what you're saying. I can't make sense out of it. One reason is that Juan de la Cosa drew the map with west to the top of the map. Let's turn it 90 degrees so that north is to the top and west to our left. There, that's better. Now let me add some words to help you become oriented to the map. Columbus sailed west from Spain and eventually discovered a number of the islands here in the West Indies. Do you notice the many crisscross lines that radiate out in all directions from the many compass wind roses, as they are called? Putting such lines on maps was a style of map making referred to as portolan charts. Such charts were very helpful to ship's navigators because you'll notice they include only the names of cities, landmarks, rivers, along coastal regions where ships would sail and need such information. Also, the wind compass lines would help plot a course to follow on water. If you're going from A to B, merely follow the compass line marked with an arrow, which is a compass course of 90 degrees east. This man was also helpful to captains who sailed ships and to the navigators who plotted courses on their maps. His name was Gerhardus Mercator. You've heard me speak of him before, especially in relationship to this map, which was named after him. Mercator, with the aid of mathematics, worked out carefully such a projection. Remember, the parallels and meridians form 90-degree angles with each other everywhere on the map. The map is accurate only at or near the equator. Towards the polar regions, there is a good deal of distortion. Greenland, for example. Mercator, however, designed his 1569 map for ships, for navigators who were having to constantly change their compass course when traveling from one place to another. On the Mercator projection, however, a true compass course from A to B is a straight line, cutting across every meridian at the same angle, in this case, 45 degrees northeast. You set your heading only once, at 45 degrees. Eventually, you'll sail into port at point B. In this period of history, new maps, accurate maps of all kinds, were becoming increasingly important to countries like England, France, Holland, Spain, and Portugal. For these were the countries that were sending men in ships to the far corners of the world, especially to the New World, to claim new land for new colonies. By 1540, Francisco de Coronado had moved north from Mexico into what is now the southwestern part of the United States. He was looking for the fabled 7 cities of Cibola and the golden treasure that supposedly was there for the taking. Instead, he found a desert-like land filled with mountains, cut by several large rivers, and lived in by Indians who built their homes in a fashion he called pueblos. But his maps were the first of this part of the New World, a beginning for other explorers to build upon, to fill in, to make use of. The same can be said for this man, Samuel du Champlain, a Frenchman who was one of the early explorers and map makers in what became the country of Canada. Between 1603 and 1616, he not only made detailed charts of the North American coastline, but founded as well the settlement of Quebec, besides discovering 2 of the Great Lakes and the one which bears his name. He wrote many accounts of his travels, and his map of 1612 was one of the first ever made of the interior of America. While Champlain was exploring for France in the north, the English were ready to settle in the south, the first permanent English settlement in North America, located here at Jamestown, Virginia, the year 1607. This map of Virginia, drawn by the famous Captain John Smith, is one of the most significant historical records of colonial America preserved for us. Captain Smith was not only very accurate in his mapping technique, but he detailed over 200 Indian names and settlements we otherwise would have never known about. Even this line of longitude, which helps to locate Cape Henry, is less than 8 degrees in error from its true position, an amazing accomplishment in view of the fact that the scientific equipment to measure longitude precisely wouldn't even be invented for another 100 years. Thank goodness for men like Champlain and Captain John Smith. Today our continent has been explored and pretty well settled in most regions, but we still need maps, simply because we will always be finding our way from one place to another on the surface of this earth. But to the early map and globe makers, we owe much. The mathematics of Babylon, the genius of Ptolemy, the courage of Columbus, the projection of Mercator, the skill of Captain John Smith. These and a great many more people helped to map this world of ours. Who knows, perhaps one day you'll make your contribution too.